All right, so it looks like we're good to go, committee. There are no more bill introductions to be allowed. And so we'll go ahead with the first item on the agenda, and that's a hearing on HB 2234. And we'll start with a briefing from the reviser. Thank you. Charles Reimer. We can't introduce bills.
No, I thought we just couldn't. Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2234 pertains to the state construction and building improvement contracting process. The bill amends a couple statutes, KSA 75-1253 and 75-5804, in two respects. First, the bill increases the cost threshold when it's required to convene a negotiating committee for the purpose of selection of professional services such as engineering or architectural services. Under current law, an agency must select such professional services from a list provided by the State Building Advisory Commission if the total cost of the project exceeds $1 million. The bill would raise that cost threshold to $1.5 million. And secondly, the bill would change the definition of the threshold or the measure from total cost of the project to the construction cost of the project. If enacted, the bill would go into effect July 1st, 2023.
Seems simple enough. Any questions for the reviser? Representative Clayton. Oh, okay. I thought you waved that little pink pen at me. Seeing no questions. Thank you, sir. We'll go to the proponent section of the hearing, and we'll start with Barbara Schilling from the Department of Administration. Thanks for being with us today.
Good afternoon. Oops. Chair Tarwater and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to add proponent testimony for House Bill 2234. My name is Barbara Schilling. I'm a special projects architect for the Department of Administration in the Office of Facilities and Property Management. I'm here today to speak on behalf of the Department of Administration in support of this House bill. For KSA 75-1253, the current limit of $1 million has been in place since 2015. Since that time, inflation and workload have significantly affected our ability to contract with professional architectural and engineering design services in an efficient manner. Securing professional on-call design services takes 3 to 4 months from the submission of the advertisement to the selection of the design team. Raising the dollar limit on what projects require a negotiating committee will significantly reduce the number of interviews needed annually and will allow the design and bidding to happen earlier. This will result in a cost savings for each project. A large percentage of these projects would also fall in the category of prototype work. One example would be sub-area renovations for the Department of Transportation. In this case, these projects were under $1 million limit a couple of years ago, and because of inflation, they are now escalating well beyond the $1 million limit. Efficiencies would be gained by the firms that are applying for this work, reducing their time and the outlay of preparing documents and the interview process. State agencies involved would save time and money since projects would be bid more quickly. And the limits have been raised over the years. Starting in 1988, there was a $250,000 limit, and it's gone up in $250,000 increments since then. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony. I will now stand for questions.
Committee, any questions? Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just, what's the difference between total cost and construction cost?
Construction cost is actually what the building costs. Total costs includes architectural and engineering fees, IT fees, or what, routing that. It can include furnishings and equipment.
So it would just be the cost of just the building,
The
not
true
all
construction cost.
not all
yes.
the extras. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So would you be able to quantify the savings for your office?
Quantify that? I'm not prepared with that answer today.
Okay, so we have a fiscal note, and it says that there's savings, that we would have savings, significant savings because of the time and effort that you would save. So if you could try to get something back to us when you get a chance. Thanks. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is Terry Humphrey. Welcome to committee.
Good afternoon. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. I am Terry Humphrey. I'm the Executive Director of the American Institute of Architects, Kansas chapter, and we're here today to support this legislation. As you have heard, this legislation is timely because, first of all, the cost of construction materials has risen. So what $1 million of construction costs looked like a few years ago is very different from what it looks like today. As a result, we believe that it is time to raise this cap, if you will, from total project costs of $1 million to construction costs of $1.5 million. We believe that it will not only be more efficient, but what we're referring to here now is smaller construction projects, as you know. And so this is a good place to establish some efficiencies. And so we highly suggest and recommend the passage of this bill. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Greg Schreiber. Schieber,
Schieber, yes. Thank
easy for you to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Greg Schieber, Deputy Secretary. All right, there we go. Start again. Mr. Chairman and committee members, thank you for this opportunity. I am Greg Schieber, the Deputy Secretary for the Kansas Department of Transportation, and I'm here today to provide testimony in support of House Bill 2234. KDOT supports this bill due to the added flexibility and time-saving measures it provides for our building projects. The State Building Advisory Commission selection method adds time and complexity to the selection of architectural and engineering design teams. And in order to avoid winter construction, schedules for these projects are very tight. Allowing the use of on-call design teams to do multiple repetitive designs saves time, effort, and reduces costs. Experience has also shown this approach can reduce time spent on plan revisions. Using Office of Facilities and Property Management on-call architects, design fees were approximately 5% of the bid price on a group of 4 buildings awarded in fiscal year 22. Typical design fees for this type of building are between 7 and 8%, and sometimes as high as 10%. KDOT would expect to see a 2.5% reduction of design costs on building projects if this limit on construction costs is raised to $1.5 million. Much of the language in the statute and the original intent of the statute remain unchanged. This amendment is to account for the increased costs of building construction due to factors such as inflation. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Seeing no questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Chad Bistro.
Thank you, Chairman Tarwater and members of the committee. I'm Chad Bristow. I serve as the Director of Facilities at the Kansas Board of Regents. On behalf of the board and the state universities, we appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony in support of House Bill 2234. The The written testimony that we provided has a graph of construction inflation since 2000, and that is graphed against comparatively the incremental increases in the cost threshold for convening a negotiating committee. That's on the second page of the written testimony that we've provided, and certainly been mentioned already in testimony. I would just note that the universities represent a significant amount of the state building inventory, and we also represent a majority, well, over half of the on-call contracts. And so we certainly urge the passage of this bill and support it. So happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Seeing no questions for you, thank you. Next up, Scott Heidner.
Is that on? There we go. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today. My name is Scott Heidner, and I'm here today on behalf of ACEC Kansas. That's the trade association that represents private consulting engineering businesses in Kansas. We would add a ditto to all the data that you've heard so far, and I think the chart that was included in the Board of Regents testimony is particularly compelling. It really shows how much the cost of a dollar is diminished and by what it can purchase in a contract compared to 10 years ago. The one thing that I might be able to add is some perspective from the private sector side. We've heard from our state agency partners, but this is pretty impactful to Kansas businesses as well. Under a traditional procurement, a larger procurement, the process does call for a full RFQ and competition, which our members embrace, but it does come with a significant cost. Many of you have run businesses and produced responses to RFPs as well, so you know there's a staff time, there's an equipment time that goes into that. It's a pretty substantial investment, and that's appropriate for the larger contracts, but there does reach a point where the contract is small enough and the fee is small enough that it simply doesn't make sense to go compete for that work. The on-call process provides a remedy to that, and I would say that our members would tell you your state agencies who serve as custodians of these dollars in this process use extremely good judgment on when to use the on-call process. Raising this threshold will help private businesses ensure that when asked to go through that full procurement process, it's for a project of appropriate size. So in addition to the testimony you've heard from the state agency partners, wanted you to know from the private sector, we view this very much as a positive change as well. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today and would be glad to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
I'm not seeing any questions. I have one. So the last time we addressed this was in 2015. The limit was $1 million. I can't imagine that this is just now becoming an issue. That probably has been an issue for the last few years since the inflation. Do you think it would be beneficial to build an inflationary factor into this number so that we don't have to wait to address this and slow down the industry?
My off-the-cuff answer would be probably so. I know my members would certainly want to hear from our state agency partners with their opinion about that too. But if there's no prohibition against you all adding an inflationary metric of some kind to it, I certainly don't see any harm that would come from that if it's an appropriate number, and there might be a lot of good that would come from it as well. But again, I think doing a quick nod of the head, shake of the head check, I don't see any signs of great distress in the audience, so I think that's probably okay.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I'm not showing any other proponents. Is there anyone else that wishes to redundantly speak to this bill? Seeing none. Are there any opponents to the bill in the room? I don't have any listed. Are there any neutral? Seeing none. We'll close the hearing on HB 2234. That seems like a simple enough bill. We'll probably try to work this tomorrow. Next item on the agenda is final action. I have had a lot of questions about the right to start bill. on when we're going to work that. We will not work the right to start bill this week. And so you don't have to worry about amendments yet. We'll probably get to that midweek next week. I would turn your attention to the bill we heard yesterday, HB 2173. We'll bring that up for discussion, and to do so, we'll start with the a quick review from the reviser, Charles Reimer.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. As the committee will recall, HB 2173 would prohibit building codes or any ordinances, resolutions, or rules or regulations of any political subdivision as defined in the bill, including cities, counties, or state agencies, from prohibiting or limiting the use of refrigerants that are approved and listed by federal law, the EPA, if the equipment containing the refrigerant is used and installed in accordance with that federal law, including any safety standards or use conditions.
Any questions for the reviser? Not seeing any. Thank you very much. Any discussion or amendments on the bill? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the reviser, I'm sorry, were any of the proposed amendments or anything that was discussed on yesterday, did anybody offer anything to you for language?
No, Representative.
Seeing no further discussion, can I get a motion to pass out the bill favorably?
If you'll remind me of the bill number, I will.
2173.
All right, I would move that we pass out HB 2173 favorably.
Okay, seconded by,
Favorably for passage. Yeah.
second by Representative Kessler. Any further discussion? Committee, you heard the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. All against say no. The bill passes. One final note is tomorrow I will be about 15 to 20 minutes late to committee. I have a constituent that's testifying. Yeah, I know that breaks your heart, doesn't it, honey? I have a constituent coming up to testify in another committee, and I wanted to be there with her. So Vice Chair Bourgeon will be running the committee tomorrow. Thank you. We're adjourned.